Welcome back. So in this video, we'll learn or we'll understand about the few important terms that is used in the Windows administration or in the Windows domain environment. So basically, to understand the concepts, so understanding the terms is very important. Starting with a server and a client. So basically, everyone know a server. What is a server and a client? But here I want to give you a clarity about what is server and a client. So basically, a server is a computer or a service which serves the end user. So basically, uh, a server cannot control the client device or client the end user. So basically, a server is to serve the service or serve the data or say serve whatever it is configured for. So always keep in mind that server is a computer or a service which is to serve the client or it is to serve the end users. And what is a client? So basically a client is a computer which gets the service from another computer. So when any computer from using which you are accessing the data or services which is running in the other computer, so basically the computer from which you are accessing the service or the data, so basically we call it as a client. And speaking about a server, so in general, a server shall be a hardware, a high configuration computer. We can call it as a server. But even the high configuration computer might be installed with the desktop operating system. So you can call it as a client also. Maybe you may have a computer which is running with desktop operating system in which you might be saving some shared folders. So these shared folders might be accessed from any other client machines. So again, even though it is running with the desktop operating system, since it is serving the file share in the network, so we can call it as a server. So basically, a server can be a computer or it can be a desktop computer or a high-end server computer. It may be running with the server OS or it can be running with the desktop OS. It shall be anything. So how it is going to be used, how it is configured. So based on that, it is defined as a server, as a client. And coming to workgroup. So basically, when you speak about a client server model, so where we used to have multiple computers connected in a network configured with the common IP subnet. So in that case, so how the computers are going to be configured in a network. So basically, in a network, the computers can be configured in two models. One is the workgroup model, the other one is the domain model. So basically, in a work group model, the name itself says that work group. So basically, a work group is a grouping of computers in a network using a common name. So generally in a work group, all the computers will be running independently. So the computers will not depend on any other computer. So example, when a user need to log into a particular computer, so again the user has to be created on the same computer. So any user which is not created in that particular computer, so that user cannot log on to the same computer. So and also if you want to share any data, so you can share the folders in the network. Either you can grant access to everyone or you can deny access to everyone. You cannot be specific or you cannot be particular, like if you want to provide access only to a particular computer, or if you want to provide access read and write access to a particular user, read only access to another user. So this kind of configurations is not possible. So basically, a work group is just to group the computers based on their work environment. Like if I have an accounts department for the, I want to group all the accounts department computers in a work group, and another team I have a production department. I have want to group all the production department computers in a group. So in this way, we can group the computers. So basically, the work group is just grouping of computers. So where you don't have any centralized administration or centralized control. So basically a workgroup is a collection of or group of independent computers in a network grouped with a common name. And speaking about a domain, so basically, domain is not just a group of computers as like work group. So because in a work group, every computer has to be individually configured and individually administrated. But individually configuring and individually administrating the computers is going to be a very big challenge in an enterprise environment where we have hundreds of computers or thousands of computers. So when you have a organization where we have only 5 computers or 10 computers, in that case, workgroup model would be a better option. But whenever you have more number of computers, so obviously it is recommended to go with the domain model. So basically, domain is collection of objects. So collection of objects in the sense a user is an object, a group is an object, a computer is an object, a domain controller is an object, a shared folder is an object, a printer, a shared network printer is an object. So basically, all these are called as objects. So as I said earlier, domain is a collection of logical objects or logical collection of objects with centralized administration and centralized control and centralized authentication. So in a domain, we'll have a master computer. So this master computer will have control over all the users, computers, groups, shared folders, and all the things. So using the master computer, you can administrate, or you can control, or you can manage, or you can manage a centralized authentication among all the computers and the users. So basically, domain is a collection of object with centralized administration, centralized control, and centralized authentication. So in a domain environment, if a user need to log on to a particular computer, so user need not to be created on the same computer. So you'll have a master computer which is called as a domain controller. So you can create the user in the domain controller. You can create a domain user in a domain controller. And using the domain user account, you can log on to any of the member computers. So where you will have the centralized authentication. And if you want to configure some controls, like if you want to set a login duration for a particular user, or if you want to allocate a particular computer, only in that particular computer the user should log in. So these kind of controls can be configured using the domain controller. So basically, domain is a collection of logical collection of objects with centralized administration, control, and authentication. And coming to a domain controller, so just before we discussed about a domain where the domain where you can have a centralized administration or centralized control or centralized authentication. So who is going to do that? So obviously the domain controller. So basically, a domain controller is a computer, or it is a master computer in a domain which can uh, uh, control, which can administrate, and which can centrally authenticate all the domain objects. So basically, a domain controller will be running with a special service, which we call it as a domain management service. So any computer which is running with the domain management service and which is configured for a particular domain is a domain controller. And the domain management service, or what we speak about, is the domain management service will be maintaining a database in which it will be storing the user information, user login information, and user configuration information. Everything will be stored in the database. So based on the configuration that is stored in the database, so the domain management service will be managing the domain objects. So here in Windows environment, the domain management service is basically the Active Directory service. So Active Directory service, in short, we call it as ADS, is nothing but a service which is going to which is used to centrally configure and centrally administrate or centrally authenticate the domain objects. So basically, any computer which is installed with Active Directory service, we call it as a domain controller. So in a domain, you may have multiple domain controllers. So you may have one primary domain controller and you may have any number of additional domain controllers. So in case of failure of the primary domain controller, you can bring up the additional domain controller as a primary domain controller so that we can uh, run our domain environment without any uh, uh, disturbances in case of domain controller failure, that is the primary domain controller failure. and understanding about Active Directory service. So just before we said Active Directory service is a domain management service. So basically it is a service which is used to centrally configure, centrally administrate, and centrally authenticate the domain objects. So, and as I said earlier, the Active Directory service will be maintaining a database called Active Directory database. So, in which it stores all the user login information, user configuration information, user control information. Everything will be stored in the database. So, whenever user is logging from a client computer, so authentication request hits the domain controller. So Active Directory service in the domain controller verifies the user login name, and it searches for the login name in its database. So if it finds the login name in the database, and immediately it will also verify the password. So whether the users type the password and the password in the database matches, so the user is authenticated and he is allowed to log into the computer. And also the rest of the configuration is also verified in the database. That is the group policy and so on is verified in the database, and the same policies and the configurations is applied to the particular user who logged into the particular computer. So basically this is about the Active Directory service, and that's all for understanding the uh, uh, important terms used in a domain environment or in a Windows environment. And we'll discuss the rest of the topics in the upcoming videos. Until then, bye bye.